Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planner Unplugged. I am very pleased today to be joined by Roy McLaughlin, who is a colleague, I'd say, on Octo now, as he's got his own podcast on the platform. Roy, hello, welcome to Planner Unplugged.
Hi there, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, great, thank you. So, as I say, Roy has just launched a brand new podcast on the Octo platform called Mañana. We're going to learn a little bit about that today, but the purpose as well of this chat is to really get into a bit of Roy's background as a very, very experienced financial services professional. So Roy is now an independent consultant in financial services, but you've got a long background in planning and advice. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, even saying it makes me feel old. 37 years in this industry, across, I was a tied agent, like actually a lot of people started as tied agents, and then bit the IFA bug from 1998 onwards. So yeah, feels like a long time saying it like that.
I imagine you've seen quite a bit of change in that time. I mean, actually, quite a lot of accelerated change even in the past few years. There's been, hasn't there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you go through that timeline from 1988, I was just in time for when Section 226 pensions were still around. So then obviously I was around for disclosure. I was around for the first set of exams that we had to do. I was around for then the second set of exams. I was around for RDR. I was around for A Day, and yeah, I mean it's quite incredible when you look back over that time. The layers that we've gone through. But obviously this world looks nothing like it did in 1988.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, as I mentioned at the top there, you've launched a new podcast on Octo called Mañana. I think it'd be really really interesting. And I know in the first episode I encourage people to go and have a listen because it's a really interesting chat with Greg Levine, who's a very interesting guest in and of himself. Um, but you had some kind of top line areas that you really want to get stuck into with the podcast, don't you? What are those? What are those? Do you want to just give us an overview of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, I think it's really important, and he's a great example of someone to pick the brains of the good and the great in our industry. And I think experience is such an important thing to be able to pass on to people. And in that particular interview, some of his anecdotes are so important. And I think someone like Greg was really important because he came from outside of our industry, and you know as well as I do, Ed, there's a lot of people that have been around as long as I have, and you sometimes think we do need some fresh people coming in. So I think that perspective is really important. But the whole point of the Manana and how it came across is I think we are very in many aspects of our life very guilty of putting things off until tomorrow. Clean the shed out, clear your bookcase, although it looks very nice and pristine. Do your tax return, clear the car out. But there's no better example of putting things off than one's own finances, and we hear it all the time. So I think what we want to try and drill down to is what the perils of that, and what can we do to make it easier to address things today? Because what's quite revealing about where I've got to in terms of age group is that obviously I've got a lot of clients who are now retiring or approaching retirement, and I think it actually makes you feel quite good about the advice that you've given, that you're leaving people in a decent position, i.e., that everything that you've been preaching and talking about for that period of time actually is starting to happen. Okay, and the feedback from the clients is also very rewarding, and many of your listeners will relate to the fact that there's nothing better than a client that basically says, do you know what, thanks for all of this nudging, cajoling, advice, and there has to be a little bit of humour there, because to be fair, financial advisors sometimes weren't seen in the best of lights, but I think people do appreciate when it happens. And then you take that to the next degree, which is I come across people in just general life who unfortunately have not really ever listened to our profession, and you hear expressions like, I'm still going to be working when I'm 75, or I'm going to have to make massive sacrifices when I come to retirement, or those sort of anecdotes. And I think that's where the whole Manana thing, whereby I will go and interview, and we're going to have a varied bunch of interviewees, not all industry, by the way. Hopefully, will just help people with part of that storytell.
Yeah, and I think for us, the reason why we do this Planner Unplugged is to really actually learn what makes it, the advice sector and people in the sector, those, because they are human beings, they're not just robots dishing out advice. What makes them tick? Why do they want to do this? Why do they think it's important? And I think that's such there's a powerful story often to be told, and people have kind of different specializations in that area. one of the things I thought was really interesting in your chat with Greg actually was talking about those challenging the silos and the differences between different bits of financial services, how they should be talking to each other more, even just as a basic thing. And his experience was relevant in that, wasn't it, as well, because he came from a different sector.
Yeah, I think the silos is something that I literally hear on a daily basis in our industry, and I think it's wrong. I get why people say I'm more of a wealth manager, or I'm more of a mortgage person, or I'm more of a protection person, but actually the danger is we can end up just staying in our silos. And yeah, he uses that expression that's sort of become very de rigueur of staying in your lane, and that's dangerous. And I mentioned it in that podcast, but just to reaffirm here, if you took our two sister professions that I now consider to be the legal profession and the accountancy profession, and what I mean by that is that I think we do sit alongside them. I think the respect we have from both those professions has massively gone up as well. Hasn't always been the case, but what do they both do? Well, you go and see both those professions, and you'll see someone on one particular subject matter. Um, Within a law firm or accountancy firm, they all have the ability to cross-refer you to other people that do other subjects. And I think traditionally our industry hasn't done that very well, and we've sort of left people in the arena that we choose to specialize in. So again, what we're trying to do by using people like Greg and his stories is to say, if you're a wealth advisor and you don't fancy doing protection yourself, why don't you align to someone who does it? But actually, my experience is that when you do that for a while, you start saying, actually, why am I not doing this myself? If you're a mortgage broker and you've never really looked at wealth before, why don't you align with someone like that? So I think, strategic relationships, for want of a better expression, is something that the industry doesn't do very well, but should do. And actually, it's quite an easy thing to remedy, because there's lots of great advisors out there who would easily and willingly talk to someone else who's maybe not in their lane.
Yeah. In your own career, have you had a particular specialization that you've kind of has been your real wheelhouse? Having said that we need to break down those silos.
Yeah, well, I'm the classic. I don't know if you've ever been to Buenos Aires, but there's a road over there that scares the bejesus out of me. It's something like a 16-lane road. You look down from this phenomenal, road, and you just go, my God, I could never ever drive down that road. But to answer your point, I started off doing mortgages. I've done private medical insurance, protection, latterly, more wealth, group risk. So I have actually careered across the lane. Some I might argue many a time. But what I did learn, what I did teach me actually was that be good at what you are good at, enjoy what you're good at, but get the experts colleagues in to do the things that maybe aren't in your lane. And I think I've hopefully proved that by having the right people around you, actually the client doesn't mind who you bring to the table. It's the fact that you can bring all of those people to that table. So if I say to someone, look, okay, I know you want a mortgage, but to be quite frank, it's not my specialty. Here's my mortgage colleague. Or you've got a particular private medical insurance situation, here's that person. Or you want some VCTs and the EISs, here's that person, or etc. etc. I could go on. I've never had a client that said, well, why can't you advise on it all? And I think they actually strangely respect the jack of all trades theory that says, if any advisor that claims that they can do everything that I've just mentioned, quite frankly, well, it just can't happen, as you know.
Well, I mean, you feel like there's almost like there's something in there that feels like, well, actually, if I'm willing to give away control of a particular area to somebody else, that's actually a proof point, right? They can look at you and say, okay, so you're not just trying to get everything out of me all for yourself. You're actually, saying, no, this is the person who can do that, sort you out for that kind of thing. And that's probably quite nice in terms of, yeah, I'm struggling for the right word there, but it's reassuring almost, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think in any walk of life, people bring in experts in various different things. The law firms and accountancy firms do it, but in anything you do, I think the key is having the conduit. And what is quite unique about financial advisors compared to some of those other professions is that because we are very much relationship rather than transactional, i.e., you're there for, in my case, 36, 37 years for some clients. I think clients actually generally welcome the fact that there is a conduit there, and that person might do some of it, but they're bringing other people into there, it's never seen as a negative. It's seen as a positive, to your point. And I think that really helps. And also, ours is such an evolving world, and there's new legislation coming out at the time and all the time. And I mean, every piece that great journalists like you guys write, you read them on. I probably read 4 or 5 pieces a day in various money marketing and financial advisor and cover and da 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 and Octo, obviously. Okay, how could you keep up with all of that? It's just impossible. And I think
Yeah.
to have the right people that you can bring into those conversations, and then suddenly the government bring a completely new curveball of legislation. I mean, IHT is a great example at the moment. You do need to be able to turn around to, right, who's the real guy that I can talk to about inheritance tax and what's happening with pensions. So I've never had a client that's ever had a problem with bringing someone along. They might say to you, is this person good? Is this person trustworthy? Is this
Mm.
person someone that you work with on a semi full-time basis? And of course, you wouldn't have that person in that room if you didn't. So signposting only works if you get to know the person you're signposting to, which is common sense in my book. But no, I think we can learn from our sister professions and from people like Greg telling stories about where he worked, McLaren, etc., and take those across, because that unique side of being an industry where repeat business is pretty constant, and we have relationships that last that long, mean that you build phenomenal relationships with your clients and customers.
Thinking about your clients with that in mind, do you have a particular profile of person who you look after and work with, or is it kind of changed over because you said you've worked in a few different bits as
Yeah,
well?
it's great. It's a great question. Do you know what? It's people. I mean, I tend to advise in sort of media type sectors, and people go, "Oh my God, how did you get into that? Sounds really interesting." All right, I'm going to reveal the big reveal here. It was complete luck. Okay, I think what happens is just that where you start off in the world, sometimes geographically as well, and the sort of people you first started to meet tend to be, at a reasonably low level, because you're meeting people in your 20s who tend to be in your 20s. So the old adage, advisors tend to advise people that are a similar age to them. What happened is that I met up a lot of people that were in a particular industry, and they carried on in that industry, but they started setting up companies. Okay. And then it occurred to me, thankfully, at a very early age, that I should get into corporate advice as well. Okay. And then it goes full circle, because those companies are set up. You do the corporate benefits advice, and then the people at the tops of the companies still want the individual wealth and protection. So that happens. So it's a bit of a fluke, but the other answer to your question is, I would say most people listening to this podcast will probably say referrals are the best type of client that you can get. And you can't pick what someone does for a living. So if someone rings you up who owns a butcher shop, or they're a lawyer, or they drive a bus, I mean, it's not for you to go, I don't deal with that profession. You
Yeah,
just tend to get people who sort of almost hang around together, if that makes sense.
move in the same sort of circles. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I
So
think that's really interesting though, especially your point about like how you've moved your career has kind of moved with your clients, and it's changed with them and adapted, and you've grown and adapted with that. I think that's really interesting. Probably
well, the
something that's a
other
bit. Yeah, go
Yeah,
on.
the other thing I'd say there is that again, I think I was lucky, and I think people of a similar age will probably agree. Coming out of, you never thought that you'd ever hear the word Thatcher's Britain in one of your podcasts, but late 80s, early 90s, what happened, of course, that there were new professions that suddenly emerged in the UK. I'm talking about media related professions, PR, advertising. They'd all been around, but they evolved. Different financial services professions. When financial services is a great thing that evolved in the late 80s. So actually, if you were around at that time, that's when you were taking your first steps into financial services. You probably met people who traditionally had been ignored by the established, advisors at the time. So maybe some of us were lucky that we evolved as some of those industries evolved, which are commonplace now. But I can promise you, in 1988, some of the industries I just mentioned were really in their infancy. Now it's going to happen again now, because if you take, some of the AI related industries now, an advisor coming in as a 25-year-old now is now going to meet some industries that, I mean, I'll be long gone, I hasten to add, but in 30, 40 years, they'll be talking about. So it's quite important to be aware of what's happening in the world, and try, and if you can, latch on to what's happening. So
Yeah. What do you? I mean, you've worked in a long time, so you must enjoy it. Because I mean, I think, and you speak with passion about it. But what do you most enjoy about the profession? What kind of really gives you that satisfaction?
It's really, really simple, and it might sound really naff, but it's not. It's to clients, okay? And when you are helping people, and I'm very, there's a vocational side to our world. Yeah, we get paid, but there's an altruistic side. We are helping people in all sorts of different ways, and maybe you didn't realize when you were a 22-year-old what how that would manifest itself. But as people go through their lives in a positive way, and you help them build up savings and pensions and investments and stuff like that, do you know what? They do come back and say thank you. And yeah, we get our legs pulled in our profession. Of course we do. I expect that, and that's fine. But the genuine, thank you, I couldn't have done this without you, just makes you feel good. And then on the negative side of some of the stuff that we do, because I'm very passionate about protection, as you know, I'm sorry, but things go wrong with people, and that's just a fact of life. And when, I've had clients that have died and had serious illnesses and have been off long-term sick and stuff like that. And I think, and in fact, without spoiling, there's a podcast coming out very soon where we interview someone where that happened to. I think what you do appreciate is that we are very, very useful in people's lives when things go wrong as well. And I think that might sound a little bit strange, but I think who else is going to help people when those things happen? And at a point of claim on a protection policy, um, my argument is that advisors are absolutely crucial because that's when we're really needed. So sorry, long answer to your short question, but it's about what you get back from the clients, and that's what keeps the enthusiasm going. And it's a
Yeah.
good industry to be in. We'll be doing this on another podcast, but I think the problem is attracting people in this industry is going to be a problem going forward. But they should join it because it is very rewarding.
So this leads me quite nicely into my next question, which is, and again, we mentioned a little bit earlier that, because you've had a long career and you've seen a lot of change come through. Um, if there's anything you could change now, if you had a magic wand to do it, what would it be?
Right. Okay. I think if I can quote my good friend Steve B here, A-Day simplification was just all done wrong. And I'm not blaming the regulators, but it just wasn't thought through properly. Okay. That's number one. I'd say, and this is controversial what I might be saying, but I'd say RDR, as good as it was, and it had many, many advantages and still does, the unintended consequence of what it did to mass advice, okay, was something that I just don't think was thought through properly, and it's still with us today. And the whole guidance advice thing, which is in the news right now, okay, is partly to do with that unintended consequence. So that's not me being anti RDR
Mm,
or anything. And there were some positive things, very positive things that came out of it because the industry did need some a reset, shall we call it? But I would say um, uh, go back to the 22-year-old Roy who was helping you know, pretty much anyone that needed advice on lots and lots of different products. Okay, you can't do that anymore for the mass public because of regulation and things that have happened, and that worries me. And it's something you do hear. I mean, the likes of Martin Lewis talk about it a lot, but I don't think that's fair. Why should younger people, less earning people, whatever we call it, but broadly, we're talking, at least the FCA's words, 91% of the population. Why can't they find, our profession? That I think that's actually quite sad.
yeah, there's an aspirational element to it as well, isn't there? Being able to, somebody who's consulting with an advisor, even if they're at a stage where their portfolio, their savings aren't huge, they're willing to do something to improve that, right? There is discussion about fixing the advice gap. I hesitate to say fixing it because I'm not sure if it would, but how hopeful are you on what's coming now and fixes that might be coming on the horizon?
Okay, so I mean this apolitically, what I'm just about to say, because all advisors, in my view, should be apolitical. But I like the sounds that I've been hearing from government about that. If nothing else, at least they're recognising that there's a problem. I think AI 100% has got a part to play here.
Yeah.
Um, the only thing is that I think sometimes what I'm hearing is where AI is the solution, full stop. Well, I don't think it is full stop. I think there is a part of the advice storytelling part that's still got to be there. So, when people say, "Oh, people in your profession are finished," it does remind me of the robo advice situation. But I'm a glass half full person, okay, and I think that if we can collaborate as an industry, and generally the industry gets on, okay, which is not the case in lots of other industries that you and I have friends in. Generally, if we can collaborate and get some pull together, and we have to get government involved, okay, we have no choice here. But I would like to think that maybe there is a guidance boundary where a certain element of, I mean, maybe we just need to change the terminology of advice with speech marks around it, can be given on a mass basis, okay? And my positivity stems from auto enrollment. Okay, so I was one of the few people that, when I first heard about auto enrollment as an advisor, grasped a nettle. Okay, I know lots of advisors shunned it and didn't get it, and certain government ministers shunned it and didn't get it. But actually, auto enrollment for me reaffirmed that people actually have some interest in financial services. Okay, yes, there's an inertia argument, I get it, but generally, as someone that's presented to literally thousands of people, because I do lots of group personal pension presentations, okay, that enthusiasm is there when people get to start talking about it, okay. And therefore, what auto enrollment I think has shown me is there is a desire to learn about your finances and to care about your finances. And demographics affect people in a way they've never done before. There's no better example of that for me than pensions. So my positive part of the answer to your question is, I think if we do this correctly, have the right people collaborating in the right way, actually, UK PLC or whatever the expression is will engage with us. Um,
Yeah. I think you mentioned AI there, and I know obviously this is just it's a hot topic. It's only going to grow. Um, the technological change, even in the past, 15 years with the advent of the smartphone and things like that, has changed financial services massively. Do you think that's been a big help, or have there been hindrances as well that have arisen from that?
Okay, so it's helped with communication. Okay, and obviously one of the ironies of COVID was suddenly we all had to start talking on these box things, yeah, like we're doing now. Now, if you'd said to most financial advisors at the start of COVID, how do you think things are going to go? I think you'd have had a lot of doom and gloom and a lot of negativity. Strangely, okay, things actually went quite well from an advisory point of view during COVID because we were able to just adjust ourselves to a new form of technology. And do you know what? You started meeting people's partners as well, which is quite interesting. But that's a chat for another day. So I think technology can be used in different ways. What I try and encourage people to do, and go back to group personal pensions, is some of the big insurance companies have absolutely phenomenal apps now, way better than they were literally 5 years ago. And
Yeah,
one of the things I try and have a pledge when I talk to customers, which is I sort of show of hands at the start, who engages with their insurer at the start, and there's no hands in the air. Do you know what I mean? And by the end of my session, I sort of try and get them to make a promise that, not every day, not every week, but 3 or 4 times a year, where you just go in and have a look at your smartphone and engage with your pension company. Once that starts happening, then we can move on to ISAs, then we can move on to protection, then we can move on to other things. And I sense that people are doing it. The downside of your question is unregulated products. Okay, and I've seen with my own daughter and some of her friends them using technology for unregulated products in a way that scares the bejesus out of me, because they need to understand the buck stops with a financial advisor for all the reasons that in terms of regulation. If you're doing certain transactions with things that are unregulated, there is no buck. So I think and I know someone's going to say, yeah, but deep buried inside that, there's probably some sort of risk warning. Is there? I don't think there is. In the way that there's risk warning every time I have to give some sort of advice. So I'm not a luddite for 1 second, and I've embraced technology, and I've just given you a good example, hopefully, where it's worked in pensions. But what we have to be careful here.
yeah, 100%. Is there anything that you think the sector could be doing better? Something that it's just kind of or not doing enough of or getting wrong?
Yeah, it's an easy fix for me. It's you ask anyone my age who started off, and most of us started off in direct sales, yeah. So very few people went into IFA world on day one. Okay, one of the good things about direct sales, it had its criticisms, okay, but was that the training tended to be brilliant. So I was lucky enough to be at Friends Provident, but I've got lots of friends who are other companies like that. What worries me now is that with a few exceptions, you don't really hear about good academies, good training schedules, that sort of stuff. And going back to that previous point about, I think we've got a serviceability problem in our industry, i.e., we need to attract people. But if you're coming in as a fresh-faced 22-year-old, where do you start off? And I think it's, if I could say, incumbent, but also it makes sense for the insurers and all of those people in the industry, the manufacturing side, to help with that training. Okay, and I think that that's something that should be looked at, because we were lucky when we first came in that there were people called broker consultants as well. But gradually they've disappeared off the scene. And I get the sometimes economic argument against it, but I just think a lot of us learned from the guys that came and the guys and ladies that came and called on you the whole time. I think there's a sense of, with few exceptions, that's disappeared. So sorry, another long answer to your short question. It's an education piece that I think
Yeah.
is needed, which will help the IFAs and advisors, which will then help in turn convey that to consumers. So
Yeah. The
that would be my magic wand.
No, no, that's good. I think I'm going to follow on from that actually, because obviously I think it's well documented now that there is something of a recruitment crisis. Oh, a crisis, perhaps a strong word, but there are issues recruiting young advisors, right, and getting more young blood into the sector. For anybody who's listening about it, thinking about becoming a planner, or getting into the sector, would you have one piece of advice for them on starting out?
Absolutely. Listen, I think this is an incredibly rewarding sector to get into because it's about people. Okay. And I don't actually think that AI will destroy that. I think the relationships will carry on. And I think, after 37 years of doing this, I've made some incredible friends, because the clients end up becoming very good friends as well, but some really rewarding situations. And, it's a career, which is not, which is worrying people. So again, I've got, a 26-year-old daughter who happens to have landed in a career, but talking to lots of her friends and lots of my clients' children in their 20s, there's anxiety out there. There is worry. There is genuine concern about what a lot of people are going to end up working. You've seen this, mentioned this week on mass, and I think, ours is a very interesting industry to get into and can be very rewarding. So I would say to people, come and talk to some IFAs. Go and do some work experience. Many IFAs will allow you to do that and just have a look at it. The problem that you've just alluded to is because broadly, there's no obvious career path into becoming an advisor. As far as I know, there's not a university degree that does it. There's lack of education in schools. That is a subject for another day. But we're not really good at promoting ourselves as a profession. And what
Yeah.
a lot of people will say of my age is, "Oh, how did you get into it?" And an expression you hear all the time, you probably heard this before, is, "I fell into it. It was a fluke. It was a bit of luck." So that's a problem. But here's your other problem. As far as I know, I'm about the average age of an IFA in the UK, right? And gradually, obviously, we are getting older and starting to retire and get ill and get out of the industry. You've got to be able to replace the 50-year-old, 60-year-olds with a new wave of people, and that really worries me. And I think we need to do something about it. And why is it so important? I mean, ignore mass advice for a minute, but if nothing else, yeah, George Osborne back in 2015 did something that I'm sure everybody underestimated at the time, but by creating drawdown basically for most people, your relationship with your client, which tended to end at 60 or 65 when they bought annuity, was now elongated until they
Yeah.
died. Okay, so now we've got an even bigger service problem, because actually we're going to need to look after people for 20, 30, maybe 40 years more than we anticipated. Okay, if there's not 20, 30-year-olds coming through to do that, that serviceability issue just compounds itself. So I really think, again, as an industry, we need to come together and think about that.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Um, Thinking about people who've had an influence on your career or influence you in your personal life, perhaps, is there anybody who really stands out? We feel
Um,
free to give a shout out if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a massive protection nerd, as you may or may not know, but you'll hear this as the Mañana goes through its turn. So, I mean, I think someone like Peter LeBeau, came along, and whether he knew it or not, was mentored me. I mean, I was, the greatest moment of my career, without a shadow of doubt, was being involved in the Seven Families campaign, and that was down to Peter, dragging me in as an advisor into that industry. So I would say him. Steve B, I've already mentioned him once, so I should
Yeah.
have mentioned Steve B twice. That really will go to his head. But just sitting there watching his presentations 20, 30 years ago. I don't know if you had the privilege of seeing him present, but just bringing to life boring subjects. And look, we have to face it. These are boring subjects, and
Yeah.
to be able to translate them and bring them to life, I think that was really important. But the biggest inspiration is clients, and what I mean by that is the, the best day that you ever have in this industry is when this little phone rings and a client says, I'm referring you to somebody, or someone rings you and says, I've got your name from so and so. That makes you feel good, and therefore I think we're all about the clients, and yes, we're helping them, but they help us. So yeah, I would say I hope that doesn't sound too naff, but it's the clients with a
No,
few of
that's
those other gents and people thrown in. So
That's perfect, and you've actually taken my last question right out of my mouth, though. So I think that's parceled it up perfectly. But I think it's a really nice point that you make there, that the moment someone says, "Oh, my friend told me to call you," it's, well, I've done a good enough job with that friend that they've sold the service for me to their pal who needs help too. I think that's such a powerful proof point, isn't it? This has been really, really interesting, Roy. Thank you so much. I'm going to finish off now. I commend Roy's Mañana podcast to everybody. It's really, really off to a really good start with Greg, and as we mentioned in today's chat, there's lots more coming. So do keep on an eye out on Octo for upcoming episodes in the future. Roy, thank you so much for joining me today.
thank you for giving me the time to draw on about my 37 years. So.
No, it's really, really interesting. And such a pleasure to get an insight from somebody with so much experience. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Obviously, we'll be back with more interviews very soon. So do keep an eye out and give everything a like and subscribe on social and follow for more. And with that, thank you and goodbye.